By the second summer, the whole of Sarndyke came to Verity Marchbank's door for water. They queued along the wall of a building the parish had condemned, and none of their children died that August. 2 winters earlier, she had been carried out of the Kite house by 2 men and set down in the road with a box of clothes. Ambrose Kite had made the reason public. She had told the coroner that the fever in the Kite cottages came from the well behind the counting house. His father's well, the one his new water company meant to sell to 4 villages. For that she lost her place, her character, and her lodging. The parish gave her hollow well baths because nobody else would take it. Roof open to the sky over the north end. 9 pounds of arrears. A plunge chamber, standing full of water, that had drowned a boy in 1811. On her 3rd night, there she went down to see whether the water could be drained. It was warm. In February, under a broken roof, it was warm. Behind the plunge, a wall of dressed stone had been built to hide something. The 2 men had been told to be quick, and they were. One took the box, the other took her elbow, and when she pulled free, he took it again. Mrs. Ord stood at the shop gate and watched, and said nothing. The inquest had sat 11 days before that, in the long room at the Fleece, on 4 deaths in the Kite cottages. Verity had nursed 3 of them, and carried their water herself. "You are not a medical man," the coroner said. "No, sir." "Then tell the jury how you come to be speaking about wells." She said she had served 6 years with Dr. Josiah Wren at the Ausburn dispensary, who taught her to draw a sample, boil it down, and weigh what was left. The Kite well stood 11 feet from a cesspit and below it. The 4 dead had all drawn there. The houses on the beck side had buried nobody. Ambrose Kite let her finish. Then he called Mr. Blank, Peveril Bash, analyst of Newcastle, who had tested the well in October at the company's charge, and handed up a printed certificate with a stamp on the corner. The jury found that the 4 had died of a low fever, no person being to blame. Verity had a book of readings in her own hand. Kite had a certificate with a stamp. She understood the difference before she reached the door. After that, no house in Sarndyke wanted a nurse who had called a gentleman's waterfowl in front of 40 people. She laid out 2 old men in January for 1 and 6 the pair. She had £4, 3 shillings, a case of instruments, and 11 volumes of readings nobody would ever read. The relieving officer offered her the house at Rothbury. She had seen what women carried out of that place, and it was never their own tools. So she went to the vestry instead. Rutherford Slay, the vestry clerk, was honest, and it cost him something. He turned the book round so she could see the entry. "Hollow well baths," he said. "Built by subscription in '98. Shut since '11. The trustees died out and it fell to the churchwardens, and the wardens have paid rate on it for 28 years and are sick of it. How much is owing? £9, near enough." He put his finger on the column. "I'd not take it. Kite's man offered £4 for the site last spring, and the wardens would have taken it if the title had been clean. Why wasn't it clean? Nobody could find the deed." She looked at the figure in the column for a while. "Will they convey it to me for the arrears?" They'd convey it to a dog for the arrears. She signed on the 4th of February. £9 fell on her that afternoon, and she had £4.3, and no lodging, and no character, and none of it could be undone. She walked out to Hollow Well with a borrowed barrow and everything she owned in it. The building sat where the ground broke away above the beck, long and low, its north gable open to the sky. The door had been nailed shut. She took the nails out with the claw of a hammer. She slept 2 nights in the keeper's room at the south end, with the barrow tipped against the door. On the 3rd night, she went down the stone stair with a lantern to see whether the plunge could be drained. A flooded cellar in February would freeze and split the walls by March. The water lay black and still under the light. She put her hand into it and waited. Her hand did not ache. It should have ached in a minute and gone numb in 5. She fetched the case, set the thermometer in with the string looped round her wrist, and waited the 4 minutes Wren had made her wait for 6 years. 52 degrees. The air above it was under 30. She wrote it on a clean page. The 7th of February, 1869. Plunge. Hollow well. 52. She sat on the bottom stair with the book open on her knee and the lantern going yellow. Wren had a rule about it. Surface water follows the air within a day or two. Deep water does not. A spring that comes up from far enough holds its own heat within a degree, January to August. In February it feels warm to a cold hand. In July it feels like a shock. 52 degrees in a sealed cellar meant the plunge was not rain and thaw. Something was still feeding it. She slept badly and was out at first light with a cord and a piece of chalk. The building ran 91 feet, south to north. The south third held the keeper's room, a small office, and 6 slipper baths with their taps robbed and the lead gone off the pipes. The middle held the dressing boxes, all fallen. The north third was the plunge chamber, sunk below the ground, open to the sky. Somebody had taken the boiler out through the gable end. The hole was still there, boarded with a door. Verity chalked her measurements on the wall as she went. Paper cost money. The wall did not. The frost had got into everything. Hoar on the inside of the partitions, white bloom on the flags, icicles hanging off the broken gutter where the snow came through. There was no frost on the north wall of the plunge chamber. She went and stood at it. A clear band ran the whole width, about 3 feet high above the waterline. The stone in that band was dark and damp and faintly warm under her palm. She put her cheek against it and did not flinch. Above the band, the wall was white and hard as everything else. She chalked a line where the frost stopped and wrote the date beside it. At 9 she walked into Sarndyke for flour and a candle. Mrs. Ord weighed it out and took her money and did not put a word in with it. At the door Verity met Isbel Hod coming in with washing on her hip, and Isbel stopped dead in the way. "You've a face on you, Mrs. Hod. My sister's in the ground with that fever. You sat with her. Then you got up in front of the whole parish and made a show. I said where the water came from. You said it after." Isbel's voice did not rise, which was worse. "You could have said it in October." Verity had no answer worth anything, because it was true. She had drawn the sample in October and waited 3 weeks for Wren's old apparatus to come from Newcastle. Wren had been dead a year. The apparatus never came. By the time she was certain, the first of them was buried. "I know," she said. Isbel looked at her a moment longer and went in. On the road back, Verity passed the Ladywell cistern. It was Kite's. It fed the counting house and the mill yard, and, if the prospectus was to be believed, would soon feed 4 villages. Every spout in the district was iced up. 3 days of hard frost. The pant in the square had a beard of ice on it, and the women were breaking it with pokers. The Ladywell overflow was running clear as a summer morning. She stood and watched it a while, and thought only that the Kites were lucky. Some men are born standing over the one hole in the ground that never fails. She was wrong about that for nearly a year, and it cost her more than the roof did. There was a boy at the bathhouse when she got back, up on the wall, hoying stones through the gap in the gable. "That's my window," she said. "It's no window. There's nout there." "Then it's my nout." He got down off the wall, ready to run, and did not. 13 or so, in a man's coat cut down. He said his name was Tam Hod. Verity worked out whose he was, and said nothing about it. "They say a lad drowned in there, in 1811. Is he still in it?" "No." He looked disappointed, and went off across the field. That afternoon, a man from the Kite office brought a letter up on a pony. It offered £15 for the site, paid the day she signed, and stated that the offer would not be repeated after Lady Day. £15. 4 days after the wardens had told her the whole of it was worth 4. She put the letter in the tin box with the readings and wrote a line under the day's figure. "He wants it, and he is in a hurry." She did not answer the letter. February and March went on the roof she could reach. The north end was beyond her. A rebuilt gable and 40 feet of slating would be 40 pounds with the timber, and she had 4. So she gave up the north end for the year. Everything went into the south third, where the slates still held. She made the keeper's room, the office, and 1 slipper bath into a place a person could live. She took the boarding off the boiler hole and hung the door properly on strap hinges. She cleared the gutter of ash saplings, which took 2 days, and split her hands open. Under the fallen slate at the valley end, she found a run of lead flashing and the old boiler cistern, still sound, that nobody had thought worth carrying out. 300 weight and a bit. The dealer at Rothbury weighed it, paid her £6, 2 shillings, and asked no questions about where a woman got lead. That was her capital for the year. She wrote it in the back of the book, and she wrote every penny out of it after. Lady Day came and went, and the Kite office said nothing, which told her something too. In the 3rd week of March, the pant in the square went bad. It went bad slowly, which is the dangerous way. The women said the water tasted flat, and then that it tasted of nothing much. Then a child at the Fleece was sick 2 days running, and then another. The talk started about the season and the wind and the drains in general. That is the talk that gets people buried. Verity filled a bottle at the pant at 6 in the morning when nobody was about. She boiled it down on her own fire in a flat dish and weighed the residue on Wren's balance. The figure meant nothing by itself, so she walked 2 miles up the beck, drew a second bottle above the village, and did it again. The difference between the two was very plain. Then she stood in the square and looked at the ground for an hour. Water goes where the fall takes it, and the fall in the square ran down from the Fleece yard. She went to Rutherford Sleigh. The pants fouled from the Fleece midden, she said. There's a drain under the paving between the yard wall and the trough. It's broken. Sleigh put his pen down. You've been in this parish 6 weeks. 9. And you'd have me take up the paving in the square on your say-so. On 4 feet of it. And if there's nothing under it, then I'd pay for the paving, she said. And I haven't got it, so I'd not offer. He looked at her a while. He was a careful man. And careful men hate to be the one who moves first. They lifted the flags on the 2nd of April, with 30 people watching. Mrs. Ord told anyone who would listen that this was what came of letting that woman near anything. 2 feet down, the drain from the Fleece midden crossed the corner of the pant's stone catchpit. The joint had gone. The catchpit had been taking it for months. Nobody cheered. That is not how it goes. 2 men swore. The landlord of the Fleece went very quiet. Sleigh wrote it in the minute book. The mason who came to break out the joint and set a new length of pipe was Adam Furse. Furse worked until dark, then came and looked at her hands, which were in a state. Who did your gutter? I did. I, he said. I can tell. He came up to Hollowell the next Saturday and stood under the gable. Making the north end good would be 38 pounds. Making it safe would be 2 days of his time and some old timber. He took 8 shillings for the 2 days when he could have had 15. Tam Hod started appearing about then and would not say why. He carried stone and ate whatever she had. Once a week he took a loaf home under his coat, and neither of them mentioned it. In the 2nd week of April, the Kite office sent another letter. 25 pounds. And the offer good, until Michaelmas. She took it down to the vestry to have Sleigh witness that she had refused. While he was writing, she stood looking at the parish plan on the wall behind his desk, made in 1841 when the tithes were commuted. Hollowell Baths were on it. Ladywell was on it. Between the two ran a dotted line, and along the dotted line, somebody had written in a small, clean hand, "Conduit." "Which way does that run?" she said. Sleigh did not look up. "Down to you, I should think. Ladywell's the spring. Everybody knows that." Verity said nothing. She had walked that ground twice a week since February. Ladywell sat below the bathhouse, down where the land fell away to the mill yard. Water has never in the history of the world run uphill for anybody's convenience. It took her until June to prove it, and she did it with a plank. First lent her a spirit level and would not take anything for the loan. She cut a straight edge 11 feet long, made a staff out of a broom handle marked in inches, and taught Tam to hold it still, which took longer than the cutting. They started at the bathhouse sill and worked down the field in stages, plank and staff, plank and staff. And she wrote every reading in the book as they went. It took 11 evenings because the days belonged to the roof. Ladywell's cistern stood 19 feet 4 inches below the sill of Hollowell baths. She checked it twice more in different weather, once going down and once coming back. Because Wren used to say, a survey you have only done once is a rumor. 19 feet 4. There was no arrangement of pipes, pumps, or providence by which the Ladywell spring fed the bathhouse, which left the dotted line on the tithe map running the other way, and the small, clean hand that had written conduit along it in 1841. Meanwhile, the building went on costing her. The gutter took a week and 11 shillings of timber. The office window took 2 days. She bought a shovel, a bucket, 4 pounds of nails, 3 bushels of lime, and a second-hand handsaw with a kink in the plate. By the end of May, the 6 pounds 2 from the lead had come down to 2 pounds 9. She was eating oatmeal, and whatever Tam's snares caught. Work came back slowly after the business in the square. The Peart girl's confinement in May, 5 shillings. A carter's arm at the mill, dressed and dressed again for a fortnight. 3 shillings and a promise. It was not a living. It was enough to keep going 1 more month, which is a different thing. And she knew the difference. In the last week of May, she measured the north wall. She had put it off because she thought she knew the answer. The plunge chamber ran 30 feet by 12. The side walls, where the boiler hole let her get at them, were 2 feet 9 inches through. Good heavy work for a cellar taking the thrust of a hillside. She ran the cord across the top of the gable, inside face to outer, over the rubble, twice. Then she made Tam hold the end, while she did it a third time. 11 feet 4 inches. She sat down on the stair with the cord in her hands. A retaining wall against that bank might be 4 feet. It might be 5. Nobody in 1798 was paying masons to lay 11 feet of dressed stone for the pleasure of it. Is it wrong? Tam said. It's too thick. Maybe they were feared it'd fall in. Then they'd have buttressed it outside, where it's cheaper. He thought about that. So there's summit in it. There's something in it, she said. Or there's something behind it. That week she drew 4 samples. The plunge, Ladywell overflow, the pant in the square, and the beck above the village. She boiled all 4 down and weighed the residue on the balance in the same hour, in the same dish, the way Wren had drilled her. The pant and the beck gave her 2 different figures, and neither was interesting. The plunge and Ladywell gave her the same figure to within a grain, and the same faint taste of iron on the back of the tongue, and the same temperature within 1 degree. They were the same water. She had 2 ends of one thing. On the 9th of June, Slay sent Tam up with a note, and then walked up himself an hour later, because he did not trust a note to say it properly. The wardens have sold your arrears, he said. They can't sell a debt. They can assign it. And they have. And I told them what I thought of them. He was angry in the flat northern way, which is quieter than most people's calm. Mr. Kite paid the 9 pounds into the parish account this morning. You owe it to him now, not to us. When is it callable? At his pleasure. Michaelmas, at the outside. Slay looked up at the open gable, and the sky through it. Miss Marchbank. He has offered for this place twice, and raised his price. Now he has bought a 9-pound stick to beat you with. A man does not do both unless he wants the ground very badly. I know what he wants, she said. He wants what's under it. Then for God's sake find out what that is before Michaelmas. To get at the wall she had to get the water down, and to get the water down she had to find where it went. It went out under the north step. She found the mouth by dropping a scrap of oiled paper on the surface and following it twice, until it went under and did not come back. Below the step was a lead-lined throat the width of her 2 hands, and in front of it the rotted stub of a timber shutter. The plunge had never been sealed. It filled from somewhere and emptied to somewhere, and it had been doing both quietly for 58 years, while the parish paid rate on a ruin. First cut her a new shutter out of elm, and charged her for the elm and not the day. They set it on the 11th of July. Then, the 3 of them bailed. It took 4 days. Tam on the stair with the zakroket. A gurat crows across erased. First holing, and the level going down about 9 inches a day against what still seeped in. Her hands went white, and stayed white for first said very little until she tried to work the 4th night by lantern. Then he took the bucket off her. Sit down, or I'm away home. On the afternoon of the 15th, the water dropped past the frost line she had chalked in February. The north wall came out of the water. All 3 of them stopped and looked at it. There was a doorway in it. A low arch, about 4 feet high, filled in with dressed stone laid dry, without a scrap of mortar anywhere. Dry laid, so it could be taken out again. Somebody had meant to come back. She took the courses down herself, one at a time, stacking them on the step in the order they came. Behind them was a passage 6 feet long. Behind the passage was a room. It was vaulted, dry above the springing, cut into the bank. 3 stone tanks stood in a stepped line, each lower than the last, the first packed with clean gravel and river sand under a lifting grate. Above it the floor opened into a bed of broken rock. The water came up out of that and turned slowly on itself, the way water does when it comes from a long way down. She stood in the door of that room a long time before she went in. The spring was not at Ladywell. The spring had never been at Ladywell. Ladywell was a cistern at the bottom of somebody's pipe. The top of the pipe was under her north wall, and had been since before Trafalgar. "What is it?" Tam said behind her. "It's the well." "It's the actual well. Whose is it?" "Mine," she said, and heard how it sounded, and did not take it back. First came through the passage, bent double and straightened up and looked at the tanks for a while. "They built this first," he said, "before the baths. You can see it in the coursing." "I know." "Then the baths were put up over it on purpose." He rubbed his thumb along a joint. "Miss Marchbank, if this is what he's after, he'll not stop at letters." At the far end of the gallery, the water went out through a stone channel. Across that channel somebody had set a penstock, a slab of iron in grooves, with a rack and a handle, wound down to leave a gap of about 3 inches. The ironwork was not 1,798 work. It was machine cut, and the grooves had been chiseled into the older stone afterwards, badly, by a man in a hurry. 3 inches of gap fed her plunge. Everything above it went down the channel toward Ladywell. The gallery had been swept once and left. On the sill of the second tank lay a small brass rule and a woman's thimble, side by side, where somebody had put them down meaning to pick them up. A lead tally hung on a chain by the grate, stamped Hollow Well Gallery 1,798. And on the vault, in candle soot, a column of dates and initials ran back through the years. The way a keeper marks a cleaning. Twice a year, spring and autumn, for 22 years. The last line said H.D. Nov 1,811. She copied the whole column into the book before she let herself think about it. She had the spring and no paper at all. A spring is not an argument. She could hear the coroner's voice saying so. Cuddy Sowerby, the sexton, was 74 and remembered his mother's talk. There was a woman kept the baths. Dunnage. He said the name carefully. The way you handle something you were told not to touch. They put her away over the lad that drowned. And there was somewhat else. About her, and the fever year. My mother would never say what it was. She'd start, and then she'd stop. Verity went to the vestry and asked Slay for the minute book for 1,811. The entry for the 14th of December was there. 6 words of it had been scratched out with a knife, through the paper, and the name had been scratched hardest. She was still standing over it when Slay came back in and said the county surveyor was up at Hollow Well with Mr. Kite, and they had a paper about a dangerous structure. Ephraim Loach, county surveyor, was a thorough man who did not like being used. And he was being used, and he knew it. He went over the north gable for an hour, with Kite standing in the field behind him. Then he served her a notice under the act. The gable was to be taken down or made secure within 6 months, which was the smallest thing he could honestly have done. 6 months, he said to her at the door. I'd have given you 3, if he'd had his way. Kite came up the path when Loach had gone. He was a well-made man of 41 in a good coat, with a pleasant way of speaking that had carried a great deal of harm over the years. £40, he said. And the 9 forgiven. You'd walk away clear and go anywhere in England, where nobody's heard of me. That was my meaning. It's not unkind. What do you want it for? He smiled as if she had asked a child's question. Frontage. The company will want a filter house along that bank. And the water under it? For half a second his face did nothing at all, which told her more than a speech. The Ladywell Spring, he said, was severed to my father's estate in 1834 by deed, with the conduit and all rights of taking. It is ours in law, and has been these 35 years. Whatever you think you have found in your cellar, Miss Marchbank, you have found it on paper that belongs to me. He had said cellar. She had told nobody but First and Tam. She said no. And he went down the path, and she stood there working out that he did not know what was behind the north wall, only that she had been in the water. She put the stones back into the arch that week. In January, First took the loose top courses off the gable and strapped the rest. And Loach came out in February and marked the notice complied with, and said so in writing, which Verity kept. The autumn payment nearly finished her. She got £3 together by Michaelmas out of nursing and a winter's worth of laying out. Slay walked it down to the Kite office himself and wrote the receipt in his own hand, which was the only reason it was ever admitted. Then came 1,870. And it did not rain. The beck was down to a trickle by the middle of June. The pant in the square went to a dribble, and then to nothing. The village went to the mill cut, and to the Kite well behind the counting house, because those were the 2 that held. Verity stood in the square on the 2nd of July and told them not to drink the Kite well. She had learned nothing from the inquest, evidently. Mrs. Ord said out loud that the woman was at it again. 2 men laughed. They drew from it anyway, because the alternative was 1.5 miles each way with a yoke. The fever came on the 11th, the same way it had come in the cottages. A child first, then the mother, then the house next door but one. Eddie Hod was 6 years old, and she was the 4th of them. Verity went down to the Hods at 10 at night. Isbel opened the door and stood in it, and neither of them spoke for a moment. I'll not have you saying I brought it, Isbel said. I'm not going to say anything, let me in. She was there 4 days. On the 2nd day, she went back up to Hollow Well at first light. She took the dry stones out of the arch, went into the gallery, and wound the penstock up as far as it would go. Then she and First knocked the boiler hole through into a proper opening and ran a length of the old lead down through it. By noon there was a spout coming out of the north wall of Hollow Well baths, running clean and steady into a trough made from a sawn cask. She had £7 4 shillings in the tin box. 6 of it was owing to Kite, and callable at Michaelmas. She spent £5 11 of it in 2 days. A cart and a horse hired from the Peart farm. 8 barrels. 200 weight of lime. Carbolic from the druggist at Rothbury, and what Eddie needed. Tam drove the cart from 6 in the morning until dark, carrying water to the cottages that could not come. Eddie Hod broke her fever on the 18th of July. 2 others in the village did not, and Verity carried that. And there was no arithmetic anybody could do that made it come out even. Isbel came up to the Bathhouse on the 20th, with her sleeves already rolled, and did not ask whether she was wanted. That was the week Ambrose Kite came and stood at the field gate for a long time. He looked at the spout in the north wall and the queue of buckets under it, and at the lead running down stone he had offered £40 for. He did not come up the path. He touched his hat to her, which was worse than shouting, and went away down the field toward Ladywell. He called the £6 on the 29th of September, in writing, by a clerk who waited at the door for an answer. She did not have £6. She had £1.13 and a cart still owed for. Slay got her 21 days by producing his own receipt for the 3, which nobody at the Kite office had troubled to enter. 21 days was time enough to be frightened in, and not enough to do anything with. The rain came back on the 1st of October, 3 days of it, and the beck filled, and Verity was glad of it, which shows how little anybody knows. On the morning of the 4th, she came down at 6 to open the spout and found the trough already running. The water in it was the color of weak tea. She had a sample boiling in the flat dish inside 4 minutes, and knew before it was down that it was wrong. She could smell it. She shut the spout with a plug of oak and a mallet, and then she went up the field shouting, which she had never done in her life. 11 households had drawn their morning water. 4 of them had already used it. The Peart boy was sick by noon. The Dodds two were sick by dark. They stood in her yard that evening, 20 or so, and Mrs. Ord said the thing everybody was thinking. "You stood in the square," she said, "and told us where not to drink. And you've been handing this out off a broken ruin for 3 months. Yes. Yes?" Mrs. Ord had come ready for an argument, and been given nothing to push against. "Is that all you've to say? The water was clean on Saturday. I have the figure for it. Something has been done to it since. By you. There is no answer to that in a yard at night." Verity did not try to make one. She went down into the gallery with Firse and a lantern. The water in the plunge had risen 14 inches since the day before and was still rising. It was cloudy. It stank faintly of the mill. The channel at the far end had backed up. Something below was holding it. They went out along the culvert in the dark with a bar and opened the 2 old inspection covers. The lower one lay 900 yards down, where the culvert ran within 30 feet of the mill cut. The stonework there had been broken in from above. A board was jammed across the channel, and the cut let in against it. The whole filthy backwash of the mill yard was going up her conduit instead of down. Firse held the lantern over the break a long time. "That's a crowbar," he said. "That's a crowbar, and 2 men, and it were done in daylight." They cleared the board at 2 in the morning. The water went down and took the filth of it away into the beck. By then the harm was 3 days old and living in 4 houses. The gallery came apart on the 9th. She had gone in to lift the ruined sand out of the first tank. A filter bed that has had mill water through it is finished and has to be dug out and replaced. Tam was on the grate with the shovel. The arch of the passage had stood dry for 59 years and had just taken 3 days of pressure it was never built for. It let go on the west side without any warning at all. Verity heard it start and got a hand into his collar and pulled, and most of him came. The stone took his left arm at the forearm and put him under the water for as long as it took her to get him up again. That was not long. It was long enough. First carried him up the stair. Isabel set the arm herself on the keeper's room table, with Verity holding him, and did not once look at her, and afterwards said only, "He'll do." The passage was half full of fallen stone. The gallery stood in 3 feet of water. The 2 volumes Verity had carried down to work by June, and the whole of the leveling, came out as a brick of gray pulp. 10 days later the justices sat at Rothbury on Mr. Kite's application. His counsel was a smooth young man from Newcastle. He called the Bathhouse a ruin, a nuisance and a proved danger, and read out the fallen arch, the Peart boy's illness, the 21 days expired, and the £6 outstanding. He read Loach's old notice too, and did not read the paper that discharged it. He said one other thing near the end, almost in passing. "The spring and conduit at Ladywell," he said, had been severed to the Kite estate by deed in 1834, with all rights of taking. His client's patience with an unlawful tapping had been remarkable. The justices ordered the north end taken down by the 11th of January and gave her until the 1st of December on the money. Verity walked the 11 miles home because the carrier's fare was 9 pence. She got in at 9 at night and went down the stair and stood on the bottom step with the lantern. 3 feet of dirty water where the spring had been. The fallen arch, and nothing in the whole world that she could put in front of a magistrate and call proof. They cleared the passage in November because Isabel Hod decided they would. She came up with 4 women and a barrow on the Monday and set it in front of all of them. Her Eddie was alive. Her Tam was not dead. Anybody who wanted to stand in a yard at night talking about foul water could come and shift stone first. First brought 2 men off the mill job for nothing. They took out 11 tons by hand in 6 days. The arch had failed on the west side, and when the fallen stone was away, Verity saw why. It was not solid. The 11 feet of wall had never been solid. Behind the failed face was a void about 3 feet by 4, dry laid and rendered, with a stone lid, built into the thickness at the same time as the gallery and by the same hands. Inside it, on 2 oak bearers, stood a chest lined with lead and sealed at the joints with pitch. She would not open it there. She had it carried up to the keeper's room and set on the table, and then she sent for Slay, Cuddy, Sowerby, Isbel, and Firse, so that 4 people who could write their names had seen it opened. The pitch came away in strips. The lead was sound. Inside was a canvas bag, and in the bag was paper, and every sheet of it was dry. The first thing out was the counterpart of the deed of trust, dated the 9th of May, 1798, with 3 seals on it and a hand-colored plan on linen folded into the back. Verity read it aloud twice, once fast and once slowly. The subscribers had settled the baths and the ground on trustees for the use of the inhabitants of Sarndyke. The deed described the property as including the spring head lying under the north end of the said bathhouse, together with the gallery, tanks, and conduit leading thence to the cistern at Ladywell. It bound the trustees to keep a taking at that cistern free to the inhabitants forever. Thence, from the bathhouse down to Ladywell. The linen plan had the fall marked on it in figures. Every figure sat within 4 inches of what she and Tam had measured with a plank in the summer of 1869. Slay sat down slowly on the end of the table. "Read the Kite one," he said. "I've had a copy in the vestry press 11 years and never once looked at the words." He walked down and fetched it in the dark, and they read it at midnight. The severance of 1834 conveyed to Sholto Kite, the Ladywell spring head, and the conduit leading therefrom to the bathhouse at Hollow Well, and all rights of taking thereof, leading therefrom. From Ladywell up to the bathhouse, 19 feet 4 inches uphill. He sold what he hadn't got, First said, and he sold it the wrong way round. His father did, Verity said. Ambrose only inherited it. The rest of the bag was 9 bound volumes in a small, clean hand she had already seen once, on a tithe map, along a dotted line. Hesper Dunnage kept the baths at Hollow Well from 1789 to 1811. She took the temperature of the spring twice a day for 22 years and wrote it down, with the yield in gallons, the state of the sand, and every household that had a taking at the cistern. In the autumn of 1811 the sickness came, and she wrote down who was ill and where they drew. The last volume held a statement in her own hand, dated the 29th of November, 1811, addressed to the trustees. 9 lines. The houses that were ill drew from the well at the Kite counting house. The well stood below the midden. She had told Mr. Kite so in October, and had been desired to hold her tongue. 15 days later the vestry scratched 6 words through her name and put her out for misconduct, and let the parish go on believing it was about a drowned boy. Verity sat with the volume open a long time after the others had gone home. 60 years. The same well, the same family, the same instruction to be quiet, and the same woman put out of doors for not taking it. In December she re-ran the levels, because hers had gone to pulp in the flood. Then she wrote to Ephraim Loach and asked him to come and run them himself at her charge, with his own instrument, taking no figure from her. He came on the 20th, in sleet, worked all day, and gave her a signed abstract at the end of it. 19 feet, 4.5. You understand? I'll say the same in front of him, Loach said, packing the staff. That's why I asked you. Cordery, the solicitor at Morpeth, read everything twice and took the case on his costs out of the result, which meant he thought he could win. Two things will lose this, he said. First, he'll say your deed is a fabrication got up in a cellar. We must prove it came out of that wall and out of nowhere else. Second, the order stands until a bench discharges it, and it bites on the 11th of January, whatever else is true. And the culvert? He broke it. That is the third thing, Cordery said. It is worth more than the other two, and I can do nothing with it until somebody who held the crowbar will say so out loud. The £6 was paid on the 29th of November by 41 people, most of whom gave sixpence. Isabel Hod carried the list round herself and put Mrs. Ord's name at the top of the paper before she asked her, which Verity thought was the cleverest thing anybody did that year. Mrs. Ord gave a shilling and told everyone it was for the parish and not for that woman. Ned Bulmer, Carter, gave 2 shillings and would not look at anybody. The sessions sat at Rothbury on the 9th of January, 1871, on the application to discharge the removal order. Everyone in Sarndyke who could walk 11 miles stood at the back of the room. Kite's counsel opened well. A dangerous ruin. A woman with no qualification. An unlawful tapping of the company's conduit. A deed of severance of 1,834, produced, with the seals on it. Then, because he was instructed to leave nothing out, he put in the company's own case for the works. The prospectus. The contract with 4 villages. The engineer's drawing of the intended filter house at Ladywell. Cordery asked for the drawing to be handed to the bench. It was a good drawing. It showed the cistern, the proposed filter house, and the line of the old culvert running back up the field to the bathhouse. On the culvert there was a small neat arrow with the word flow beside it. The arrow pointed down the hill, away from the bathhouse, toward Ladywell. Whose hand is this? Cordery said. The company's engineer, said Kite. From the table, before his counsel could stop him. Made when? Last spring. Then the company's engineer surveyed the ground, Cordery said, and the company's deed says the water runs the other way, and the bench may take its choice. After that it went quickly. The way things go when the ground has already gone. Ephraim Loach gave his levels. 19 feet 4.5, taken with his own instrument in December, in sleet, at the applicant's charge. He said so, and let the bench make of it what it liked. Rutherford Slay produced the vestry copy of the 1,834 severance, and read the words leading therefrom to the bathhouse aloud twice, once at his own speed and once at the bench's. The 1,798 deed was proved by 4 people who had watched it come out of the wall. Then it was proved properly, in the only way that mattered. The bench went and looked. They walked the field in the afternoon. 2 magistrates, the clerk, counsel on both sides, Loach, and about 90 inhabitants of Sarndyke keeping a respectful 30 feet back. Down the stone stair. Along the passage that 11 tons of stone had come out of. They stood in the gallery with candles and looked at 3 tanks stepped down in a line, and water turning slowly in the broken rock, and a machine-cut penstock chiseled crookedly into stone, a lifetime older than itself. Verity held the linen plan of 1,798. Open against the wall while the clerk read the schedule, and Loach checked the dimensions with a tape. Every figure held. One of the magistrates, an old man named Fenwick, put his hand flat on the north wall the way she had done 2 Februaries before, and left it there a moment, and said nothing. She gave her evidence standing in 6 inches of water because the bench asked her to. She explained why a spring at 52 degrees in February and 52 in August cannot be rain. She explained the flat dish, the balance, the residue in grains, the 4 samples of May 1869, and why 2 of them were the same water. Kite's counsel asked what right she had to any of it. 6 years with Dr. Josiah Wren at the Osborne dispensary, she said. And 11 volumes in my own hand. He asked whether Dr. Wren could be called. She said he had been dead 5 years. Nobody in the room laughed. Then Cuddy Sowerby read out the burial register for the autumn of 1811, and Cordery read out Hesper Dunnage's list of who took water where. The 2 of them ran alongside each other, name, for 4 minutes. Ned Bulmer got up on his own account at the end of the day. He had been paid 30 shillings in October to open the culvert cover below the mill and jam a board in it. He had been told it was to test whether the ruin was leaking. "Who paid you?" Cordery said. "Mr. Kite's man." "Out of Mr. Kite's hand?" "In the yard. And I counted it there." "You knew what it would do." "I did not." Bulmer looked at the floor and then made himself stop looking at it. "My own lass drank at that spout on the 4th. She was 3 weeks in her bed. I've known a fortnight and said nowt, and I'd sooner say it now than carry it about with me any longer." Adam Furse followed him and described the crowbar marks. And Loach confirmed them from his own inspection. Kite said, loudly, that the man was a liar and had been dismissed for drink. Bulmer had never worked for him. The clerk established that in 2 questions. The bench discharged the removal order. It declared that the spring head, gallery, and conduit passed with the bathhouse under the deed of 1798, and were never in Sholto Kite's power to sever. It gave Verity her costs against Ambrose Kite. They committed him for trial at the assizes on the culvert. He went out through 90 people who stood aside for him without being asked, which is a thing Verity thought about for a long time afterwards, and never once wrote in the book. The assizes took 9 days in March and gave Ambrose Kite 9 months. The company went with him. A water company that cannot show a title to its water has nothing to sell. The 4 villages had their contracts back by Easter, and the shares that had been talked about in every parlor in the district turned into paper. The well behind the counting house was filled in on the justice's order, with clean stone in front of witnesses. Cuddy Sowerby watched the whole of it with his hat in his hands. Verity got £91 of her costs out of the wreck and never saw the rest. £91 was enough. First rebuilt the north gable between May and August with 2 men and a horse, and put a roof over the plunge for the first time since 1811. She paid him properly. He argued about it and lost. In April, the vestry contracted with her to keep the taking at Ladywell open under the covenant of 1798, and to maintain the gallery and the filter bed, £22 a year. It is not a fortune. It is the same money every quarter day, which she had never had in her life, and it paid the rate and the lime and the sand and left something over. The wash house opened in June. 4 coppers, 2 set pots, and a drying loft over the old dressing boxes, a penny for a slipper bath, 2 pence for the wash house, and as much hot water as a woman could carry. Isbel Hod keeps it. She was given the keys, the book, and the fixing of the prices, and she put the price up once without consulting anybody. 3 pence for the wash house, Verity said. 2 pence doesn't pay for the coal. You might have said. I'm saying now, Isbel said, and went on counting. Tam's arm healed a little crooked and does everything it has to. He holds the staff for the leveling twice a year and has begun to argue with the readings. That's not 4.5. That's 4 3/8. Then say so in the book, Verity told him, and put your initials beside it, and be ready to be wrong in front of somebody. He is learning the balance too. He can already boil down a sample without spilling it, which took her 3 months. In May, the vestry sat on Rutherford Slay's motion. The minute of the 14th of December, 1000, 811, was read out as far as anybody could still read it. A new entry was made beside it. It recorded that the removal of Hesper Dunnage, keeper of the baths, had been procured on a false report, that her statement of the 29th of November was now before the parish, and that the vestry was ashamed of it. First cut her name into the lintel of the gallery door in July. Just the name and the 2 dates of her keeping. "There's room for a line under it," he said. "I've tried 4. They were all worse than the name." He looked at the stone a while. "Aye," he said, and packed his chisels. "Mrs. Ord tells people she was uneasy about the Kite well for years, and that her shilling was given to the parish. Verity lets her. A village that has to agree about everything is no use to anybody." In June, the coroner sent for her. There was a death at Longhoughton, and a question about a well, and the letter asked whether Miss Marchbank could attend and bring her books. She read it twice, standing in the yard. Then she got the black dress out and brushed it, and went, and gave her evidence, and was listened to from the first sentence to the last. She came home on the carrier's cart and said nothing about it to anybody for a week. By the second summer, the whole of Sarn Dyke came to her door for water. They came from 6 in the morning, along the north wall, out of the sun, with buckets and yokes and the little handcart the Dodds had made. The spout ran clean and steady off the lead first had set into the stone. The trough was a proper trough now, cut by him out of one piece. Nobody paid her a farthing for it. The covenant of 1798 said the taking was free to the inhabitants forever, and Verity had read the words often enough to know what they were worth. August was hot and dry, and the beck went to nothing again, and no child in the parish died. On the last night of that month she went down the stair with a candle after the queue had gone, past the new door, along the passage, into the gallery. The water was turning slowly over the broken rock the way it had turned since before anybody had a name for the place. She set the thermometer in and waited the 4 minutes. 52. She wrote it in the book. The day and the figure. The way she had written it every day for 2.5 years. Then she took the candle and held it up under the vault. The old column of soot marks ran down the stone, twice a year, spring and autumn. 22 years of them, ending at HD. Nov. 1811. Underneath that line there were 4 more now. In smoke. In her own hand. She smoked the 5th one in beside them and went up to her supper.